How far would you go to protect a family secret? I'm going to tell the true story of how a local hero, Christopher Brewer, kept a family treasure safe. One of the most infamous killers in the history of Florence, Alabama, was Mountain Tom Clark. Tom Clark deserted both the Northern and the Southern armies before getting a gang of his own, killing and pillaging his way across the South. Most people in the Florence area are familiar with Tom Clark. He's buried under a heavily traveled road in the area. But most people aren't as familiar with one of his victims. Christopher Brewer was an African-American slave of John Wilson from the wealthy Wilson family in Florence, Alabama. The Wilson Cemetery is near the grounds of the very house that Christopher was a slave in. There's a grim message carved into the two markers which tell the tragic deaths of John Wilson. An outlaw gang headed by Tom Clark attacked the Wilson Manor on an April night in 1865. John, then old and sick, was taken outside and cruelly burned to death. His nephew Matthew was next, and he met the same fate. You see, they didn't want to give up information that would lead to the family treasure. They had remained silent, and they died. After killing the two men, Tom Clark and his gang ran into the house servant, Christopher Brewer. Tom Clark demanded that Christopher show them where the treasure was. They pointed out what had happened to the Wilson family when they refused to answer the question. They threatened Christopher, calling him every name in the book. So there Christopher sat, staring down the barrel of a gun, risking his life, protecting a treasure that didn't even belong to him. Christopher Brewer was an African American who was born into slavery before the Civil War even started. The Wilson family knew him for his enthusiastic fiddle playing and his great dancing. He was actually given to the Wilson family as a wedding gift. And unlike most slaves we hear or read about, Christopher had a good relationship with his owners. In fact, when the Civil War was over, he remained with the Wilson family as a house servant. One would have to think that a former slave would easily give up his former owner's treasure if a gun was to his head. But it's said on the night of the Wilson tragedy, Christopher refused to tell Mountain Tom Clark where the money was buried. And because of this loyalty, he fell victim to the gang's cruelty. He was tortured and he was shot. However, he got lucky. It didn't kill him. He survived the gunshot. And once he recovered, he led some of the Wilson family to where the buried treasure was. And it's a good thing that he survived the gunshot. He went on to get married. He and his wife had a daughter. The daughter married a man with the last name of Handy, and those two had a son. They named the son after our hero Christopher. William Christopher, or W.C. W.C. Handy, a legend with a legendary grandfather.